Hey there, my friend. In today's writing power lesson video, we're going to cover how to write good dialogue. So whether you're writing a novel, a memoir, a short story, or even a self-help book, it's essential to be a master of good dialogue. It really places a reader in the scene. My name is Brooke Adams Law. I'm an award-winning author and a writing coach, and subscribe to my channel for more tips on how to write a book. You can also visit my website at brookeadamslaw.com. So let's get started. How do you get better at writing dialogue? So we're going to walk through 6 tips today to help you become a master of good dialogue. The first tip is use dialogue to move the plot forward and reveal character. So don't use dialogue just to have the characters like chit chat and shoot the breeze with each other. Right? When I was writing my novel Catchlight, in a very early draft, I got feedback that was like, there's way too much of just the characters sitting around drinking coffee and just like shooting the shit with each other, right? So don't do that. Use every piece of dialogue to move the plot forward and or to reveal character. So cut out all the parts that are like, good morning, how are you? I'm fine, how are you? Like if you're bored while writing it, cut it out and just give us the essence that the reader needs to kind of overhear or eavesdrop on. Tip number 2 for writing better dialogue is to read it out loud. So people hate this tip because they don't want to do it, but it is going to pinpoint for you all the places that your dialogue is heavy or slow or awkward. You're going to notice places where one character talks too much. You're going to notice places where another character might just say yes, or right, like you'll kind of notice some of those tics that when you're reading on a screen or even on a page, if you print it out, your eye might just skip over it. But when you read it out loud to yourself or to a small audience, you're going to catch some of those writing tics that you have, and you're going to be able to pinpoint places where your dialogue needs work. So read your dialogue out loud and then edit from there. Tip number 3 on how to write better dialogue is study. Study authors who write good dialogue. So literally like go to your bookshelf or get on your Kindle and look at the last few books that you read, particularly if they're in the same genre that you are writing in. So if you're writing romance, you could look at a romance novel. If you're writing historical fiction, look at historical fiction. I'm having trouble saying that. Or you can look outside your genre for like how the great authors do it, right? So you can be studying Hemingway and Faulkner, or you can also be studying just the authors that you really love reading. So like go to a passage of dialogue and really like look at it, right? Pretend that you're going to write a critical paper, or you're going to go to a college literature class and have to discuss this passage of dialogue, and really notice like, what is the writer doing? How are they using dialogue in that scene? How does the dialogue reveal the characters? How does it move the plot forward? Start asking yourself all these questions. You can literally take notes or like type up some notes for yourself, study, and see how you can use the tools that you see other writers using in your own dialogue. Okay, so tip 4 of how to write better dialogue is listen to actual conversations. So this is a bit hard as I'm recording this. We're still in the middle of the pandemic, and I understand that it's harder to kind of be in coffee shops or something like that. But if you can be in a place where you can just like listen, right? Listen to dialogue, just sort of listen and notice like how do people talk, particularly if you're setting your book like in your own town or your own area of the country or of the world. How do people talk to each other? What makes their conversations like particular to this place and time, right? And you can start picking up on like, you know, what does their accent sound like? You know, what are words that people in other parts of the country or the world don't necessarily use in everyday conversation? What is kind of the cadence of just a conversation between friends, or the cadence of, I once overheard in a coffee shop, kind of a sleazy insurance salesman trying to sell a young guy on term life insurance. And I was just like, oh my gosh, or no, sorry, whole life insurance. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so awkward. And the guy like didn't want to buy it, but the insurance salesman was trying to convince him, right? It was super awkward, but it was also like a learning experience, because I'm like, this guy is trying to sell this guy on something, and I just sort of like listened in, right? So when you can, listen in on real conversations. You can also notice, like, when you are watching TV or watching a movie, like, notice how the dialogue is written, right? Notice what the dialogue is doing. It's a bit different in kind of screenplay or a teleplay, but notice what you can, pick up what you can about how characters on the screen talk to each other as well. Okay, tip number 5 for how to write better dialogue is to tell it slant. And what I mean by that is people don't always come out and say what they're really thinking, right? People are passive aggressive, or they're caught in like old patterns where they feel like they can't say what they really mean, or maybe they don't know what they really want, right? But so their dialogue isn't, the way people have conversations in real life isn't straightforward. It's kind of all over the place, right? Someone's trying to get someone to do something that they want, or they're trying to convince someone, or they're nagging someone, or, they're trying to get somebody on their side. So think about, don't have your characters on the page just come right out and have a direct conversation, because often in real life, that's not what happens, right? We have these slanted conversations where one person says something, they mean one thing, but the person listening hears something else, right? So the great thing about writing a book, particularly, is that you can get what the person is saying out loud, and you can also get their thought process, right? With how they receive what's being said, or their intention behind what they're saying. And then, particularly if you're using a third person omniscient narrator, you can get both sides, right, of what people are thinking and feeling, and it can be really fun and juicy. So use dialogue in a less straightforward way and tell it in that slanted way, right? So how are people, trying to get someone to do what they want, being passive aggressive, etc. It's really fun to explore. So tip number 6 for how to write better dialogue is, it's going to sound super dry and boring, and it's so important. It is to punctuate your dialogue correctly. So it really takes a reader out of a story if the dialogue isn't punctuated correctly. And if you're submitting your writing to a journal or for publication or to a literary agent, it stands out like a sore thumb if you're consistently punctuating dialogue incorrectly. So a few pointers. So let's say one character speaks a line of dialogue. When the next character responds, their response goes on another paragraph line. So hit the enter key on your computer, hit the tab key, right? It goes on another line if someone's answering. If one person is speaking and you're like, Shelly said, blah, 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 blah. And then she put her bag down and she said, blah, 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 blah. That can all go in one paragraph because it's still the same person speaking. But if Shelly's friend is answering her, it goes into a new paragraph. Okay, so going along with punctuation, let's talk about dialogue tags. So dialogue tags are when you say like, hello, she said, right? The she said is the dialogue tag. If you use the word says or said, it kind of disappears, right? So if you say like, oh, Shelly, blah, 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 she said, it starts to disappear. The reader kind of like skips over it, which is perfect because we want the reader to feel like they are in the conversation. When you start using words like she replied, he answered, she exclaimed, she argued, it kind of is a bit jarring for the reader. It doesn't just like disappear. You kind of remember that you're reading a book, but you want people to feel like they're in the middle of a dream, right? There's a famous writer that talked about fiction as like the continuous dream. So use said, don't use all the other dialogue tags, replied, answered, shouted, exclaimed, whatever. You said, it makes it kind of disappear. And the last piece is around punctuating dialogue correctly is punctuation at the end of a dialogue quote goes inside the end quote. So, hello, she said. You do an open quote, the word hello, a comma, a close quote, and then the she said is all lowercase. So I've seen people lately sometimes do an uppercase, but if you have a comma And then a dialogue tag, it's always lowercase, she said. So like I said, it's a bit technical, and also it really is a signal to an editor or an agent that you don't quite know what you're doing. You don't have a master of formatting, and that's really important. So you could have the best story in the world, and if your dialogue is punctuated incorrectly on a consistent basis, the person is going to be like, oh, maybe they don't really know what they're doing. They might not get past the first couple pages. So punctuate consistently and correctly. And that brings us to the end of this video on how to write dialogue better. So remember to subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and I'll see you next time.